So he has sued the Biden administration dozens of times. He's also won dozens of times, but his legal victories go past the federal level. Joining me now is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Now, you just defeated an impeachment inquiry, 16 acquittals. We have to ask, the Daily Caller just broke this story. You get acquitted from this impeachment trial that did start behind closed doors. They had no evidence. They admitted they had no evidence. And then earlier this month, the House impeachment managers, they released your home address. Do you think that this was done intentionally to send you a message?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to do as much harm as they can. Clearly, the way they did this whole impeachment, they didn't talk to me. They didn't do it in public. They didn't make it transparent. They did everything secretly. And then they did it really fast so that even the members of the House didn't really know what they were in for. They ended up getting commitments from them very quickly, and then they're all committed to doing this, I think, awful thing to the voters, which is unelect somebody that just got elected 4.5 months prior. So yes, I do think they clearly released all of this information, including my personal address, my phone number. And the downside for me is I get a lot of, we get death threats, and it just creates more risk for them. They know that.
Do you think there will be any kind of repercussions on those individuals for releasing that information?
There should be. They passed the law, and it was just recently went into effect September 1st. So almost all of them voted for it. I think there's 2 members out of the 150 House members that voted against it, but it was passed. It was passed by the House and the Senate. The governor signed it, and it should be enforced against them and not have exceptions. Now, we filed with the DAs in each of their counties and asked him or her to investigate. If obviously it's their ultimate call as to whether they want to do anything with it. But in my opinion, if you don't hold legislators to account for what they passed, then we ought not to have a law at all.
Question about holding legislators to account. The Speaker of the House in Texas is a Republican, correct? Is he the type of man that will hold his fellow comrades to account, or is he anti-Ken Paxton? He's
not going to hold them to account. He himself wasn't held to account for being, inebriated on the House floor. I asked for them to look into that. They didn't even take 2 seconds to take any real look at that. They just denied it and moved on. So as it relates to the House, it's completely political. It's unfortunate in our state. We have a Republican state, but the House is controlled by the Democrats, and they do it very smartly, and they've done it for years where they block vote. So there's like 65 of them. We have 150 House members. So any Republican that wants to get elected can just go to the 65 Democrats, and then he or she only needs 10 Republican votes. And so what happens is whoever gives the Democrats the most, who will do the most for them, gets the vote of the Democrats. So there is a rush to the bottom. There is a rush to satisfy the Democrats, not the Republicans. And then the Republicans just have to go along. If they want, power, so-called power, then they have to go along with whatever the Democrats have told the Speaker to do.
This just sounds like a classic, rhino establishment party that you're dealing with. So my question for you now is, you have endorsed a slew of Republicans to primary the Republicans that have impeached you. Do you think Texans are willing to vote for a new Republican? Do they want out of this kind of political party machine that you just described?
I think they haven't known about it. I think the media doesn't disclose in general.
Per usual.
A lot of them don't know. I mean, even outside media wouldn't really know, but inside media, the local papers, they know. They never talk about it. So this is a story that's sort of been untold, and I've decided I'm talking about it so that we can at least have transparency in how the so-called Republican House is being controlled by the Democrats. And I do think that given the choice, if they know they have a choice, and they've got a speaker who's appointing Democratic chairs, they have a speaker that pushed an impeachment with, as you said, no due process and no evidence. You have a speaker that won't do anything about the border. You have a speaker that won't do anything about election integrity. I don't see why the Republican primary voters wouldn't want to make a change.
Right. Now, speaking of the border, you were in the Big Apple, which has become now the big migrant crisis. And even though New Yorkers have now taken in migrants, you still bear the brunt of the problem in Texas. And one problem that has come up is Colony Ridge. So 33,000 acres, about 40,000 people, and Republicans say there is crime and drugs here. Now, you have said your office is looking into it. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what you're looking for?
So we're trying to understand how this thing got created. It was created legislatively. So it's the legislature, whoever did that in the legislature needs to figure out a way to fix their own problems, because that wasn't, it was not done by the voters. It was done by the legislature. So they're going to be responsible for trying to figure out how to address that in the future, and whether they're going to address that specifically, or they're going to say, okay, no more of this. This is obviously a problem and creates a lot of, basically draw for illegal immigrants and creates a lot of crime.
And one of the appeals for this land is that they keep telling people, you don't need a social security number. You don't have to be a citizen to buy land. Now, there's no federal law that says a non-citizen can't buy land, and I don't believe Texas has a state law that says the same. Would that be something that you would, one, be interested in pursuing or looking into, / is that even legal to say non-citizens can't buy land?
Look, I think states have their own sovereignty, and if they decide that they want to limit purchase of land to U.S. citizens, I don't know why they couldn't do it. I'm sure the federal government will try to find some way to undo that, like they do everything else, right? They're cutting our fences, right? So it's a constant battle with the federal government, who literally is against anything that would protect American citizens from what's going on at the border.
I'm happy you brought up the cutting fences. So you guys are obviously no stranger to suing the Biden administration. They have been engaged in a lawsuit over the floating barriers, over the fences, and the Daily Caller News Foundation actually watched border agents cut the fences because they're obligated to. Do you have any updates on that case?
I can tell you we are going to do something about it. Okay. So I've only been back a few weeks, so we're catching up from 4 months of inaction. This is part of what the House accomplished. They stopped us from going forward with these types of initiatives, so now we're behind. But we are looking at it, and I'm pretty sure you're going to see something relatively soon as it relates to what they've done to the fences that were protecting the citizens of my state.
Now, obviously, you've heard what's happened in Israel along the Gaza border. As I'm watching what happens, I watch this bloodshed. I can't help but think, if the United States ever took a hard stance and wanted to reconcile the cartel issue at the border, I could only imagine we would see similar bloodshed and violence that we've seen on Israel and Gaza here. Do you think there's a possibility that Texas or the United States could ever really rule with an iron fist with the cartels without having an incident like we're seeing in the Middle East?
Look, the Biden administration has empowered the cartels. There's no doubt from day one that they have a tacit agreement with the cartels. You bring people to the border, make billions of dollars, make as much as you want, make more, just keep making more. You can do it with drugs, you can do it with people. And we won't make you run or hide, so make it really efficient. Just drop them off, we'll take care of the rest. So you stop that, and you are going to create some issues because you're stopping their money supply. Whether you do it on the drug side or whether you do it on the people side or both, you're going to create some tension with the cartels, because right now, they got a partnership. They got a deal with the Biden administration. No one talks about it. No one admits it. But you can look at how the actions are being played out, and you know it's there. And it's creating long-term problems because they're also gaining, with all that money, they're gaining power, more resources, and they're infiltrating the United States. So they're setting up all kinds of cells and organizations across the United States. And the Biden administration is like, yeah, come on. We're fine with that, because we want other things. So if we end up with a lot of crime, we end up with dead kids. They'll never say that, but that's what they're allowing and promoting.
So when Governor Greg Abbott says we're going to close the border, if you guys do close the border, will there be that same level of potential for violent crime from the cartels, or is it? Look,
I have no doubt that they'll fight back, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't protect our own citizens. We have to, especially given that the federal government says not only we don't want to protect your people, but we're actually willing to invite people in to harm your citizens. We're not for your people. We're against your people, and we're going to do everything we can to get the cartels, incentivize the cartels to bring as many people here as they can, and to, have the opportunity to import fentanyl and let our kids die.
And then on top of just importing drugs, you are importing quite literally 1.8 million people between October and August. Now, you led the charge in 2020 for the election. You were questioning that. What do you say to Texans who are concerned that when you have such a permeable border, do you have a permeable voting system? What kind of protections is in place?
We're in serious trouble in Texas. We did something that most states didn't do. We stopped the mail-in ballot fraud thing that went on in so many other states. That's why you didn't see us counting votes for 3 days. They tried that there. We had 12 lawsuits that we had to win in order to stop what happened in Georgia or Michigan, Wisconsin, because they were trying to violate state law, and all these judges were saying, yeah, you can mail out these ballots all all over. Of course, we don't know where they go, and we have no proof when they submit them that they came from the right person. When they say, well, you can't prove voter fraud, that's right, because the system just broke down and we violated all our state laws. We stopped that. But now the Court of Criminal Appeals, which is presumably Republican, nine Republican members, they're our top criminal court, not the Texas Supreme Court. Well, they just struck down a statute a couple of years ago that took away the Attorney General's ability to prosecute voter fraud. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with the DAs who have been funded by Soros. So that means there will be no prosecution of voter fraud. So this Court of Criminal Appeals, which by the way have 3 members up, and I'm assuming they'll have challenges, we need to change that court because they struck down a perfectly good statute and said the reason the AG can't prosecute voter fraud is because he's in the executive branch and he's not allowed to go to court. That's a judicial function, so it's a violation of separation of powers. Well, if they're right, then every AG in the country since we started has violated separation of powers, and even founders set up a system and said we're going to violate our own constitution from the beginning. So they can't be right about that. They're just wrong, and they made it up. And in my opinion, they're doing the bidding of a guy like George Soros. It's perfect.
Right. And now, is this something that your office will appeal to a higher court?
There's no appeal. That's why it's so genius. They got this Republican court that nobody knows, because nobody knows who's on the Court of Criminal Appeals. Even most lawyers don't know. Republicans don't know. They just run and get elected, and if you get the right person elected, they can do damage like this. And so there's no appeal. That's why it was so genius. So when they told us this, we're like, so all these cases of voter fraud that we were investigating, we had over 900 cases that we were prosecuting or investigating. So when they tell you the narrative is there's no voter fraud, well, there's no voter fraud because we don't investigate.
They took it away.
Yeah, and all over the country, nobody else is doing this. We were doing it. We had 4 full-time prosecutors that we'd finally gotten in place to get this done, and then they stopped me from doing it. So now there's no prosecution in the state of voter fraud.
That just seems like the voters' voices are clearly not being heard. They elect you to hold others to account, and now the court's telling you can't do what you were elected to do.
And what the legislature directed the Attorney General to do since 1951, which we've done thousands and thousands of times, we have thousands of cases of precedent, which they affirmed. And it's only this court out of the blue says, no, all of those cases were wrong. For the last 72 years, we've been violating the Constitution. And by the way, that means I shouldn't be allowed into civil court too. This Texas Supreme Court should tell me, no, the Attorney General can't go to court to represent the state on any cases. We have 38,000 of those. So if they're right, I shouldn't be allowed in court, nor should any Attorney General in the country, because we're violating the Constitution, separation of powers. That's how ludicrous this is.
I'm really trying to wrap my head around this. So could a Texas voter take this to a court if you can't? Could they? They can't appeal to the Supreme Court.
It's the George Soros DAs in these big counties that he's gotten elected. They're the only ones that can do it because that's the authority given by the legislature to them and to me. Well, Court of Appeals said, no, we can't have him do it. We want these guys to do it. And of course, they know they won't do it. That's why they did it. And I'm trying to sound the alarm. I haven't gotten the alarm out to some of our leadership in the state, but they're going to start hearing a lot more from me. I brought it up. They know it, but more people, more leadership needs to be involved. I tried to fix it. I tried to get the statute reauthorized in the Texas House. I got it through the Texas Senate. We could not get it through the Texas House. I was told by the leadership, Dave Phelan, the Speaker's office, we don't have time for that.
Are you sure that's what he said, or was he trying to say something else?
No, he literally was, we don't want you to have this authority. We're not going to give it back because guess what? The Democrats don't want you to have this authority, and I'm here to take care of them. That's what he does. And we are going to lose the state if we do not fix this. I'm sounding the alarm. We have to fix this.
Right.
We have to pass the legislation again. I tried in this last session. He killed it. But we also have to change our Court of Criminal Appeals or they will destroy our state. It's a genius move by Soros. And it's unfortunate that we haven't gotten a big call to action, but that's what I'm going to be working on over the next couple of months.
Well, it seems like once voters are actually aware of it, it's too late of an issue. And I just read, and I could be wrong, but I think it was in August that the Department of Justice said, because you guys were tossing ballots out that were missing information, the mail-in ballots, that you can't reject those. And Texas is not the only state, right? We saw this in Pennsylvania, North Carolina. What's the bottom line for those on the left for accepting ballots? It seems like they're just willing to accept a piece of paper if they can.
Well, so I think the bottom line is they want voter fraud. So if they can, these Democratic states particularly, I don't think you could ever win them back because when you mail these ballots out to everybody, you don't really know who's getting them, right? And you don't know who's filling them out because there's no photo ID and there's no signature verification.
Right.
So there's no way. So we're just going to let the ballots go out to everywhere. And we're just going to say, well, we don't really care if this is a fair election. There could be millions of cheating ballots. We're good with that. We want everybody to vote 1,000 times, as long as, that makes us feel good. But really what they're doing is setting up a system where it's impossible to have a fair election. That's what they want. And guess what? They get Texas.
Oh,
it's done.
Forget about it. You'll never see
Republican. And that's why we're in this fight. That's why the DAs have been replaced in Texas. That's why they put the Court of Criminal Appeals in place. And that's why they wanted me out. If you have all three of those, there's no way to fix this.
It's the perfect
recipe. And
recipe.
they almost got me.
Well, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say I'm glad they didn't get you. I want to shift gears here to education. So Oklahoma, they have passed a school voucher program. And the way that theirs works is that you will just get a tax refund rather than every taxpayer pay into it. Now, the Texas Senate, they approved a $500 million school voucher program this week. It's going to the House. School choice is great. But some concerns that I've seen on Twitter from parents is the following. They're worried that by giving $15 million to the comptroller to extend the government and extend this type of voucher program, that the government will say, look, we'll give you a voucher, but there's a catch. You need to teach about gender ideology, climate change in this manner. Now, Oklahoma seems to have a system in place that protects parents' rights. How is Texas going to protect parents who want to send their child to a private school or homeschool them and want the voucher, but don't want their children being indoctrinated?
So the difference between Texas and Oklahoma is that Texas doesn't have a state income tax. So Oklahoma taxes their people on their income. We don't do it. So we can't give a credit on something we don't charge, right?
Right, okay.
So that's the difference. We don't have an income tax, and we're not going to have an income tax. So this is a way of... schools are funded by mostly property taxes and money from the state government. This just gives parents a choice because there's no credit to give them, right? So it has to be indirectly the state taking all that money that got mixed into the property tax, which is local, and sales tax money, and giving it back to parents to make the decision about where they're going to educate their kids. Now, no parent is required to take the money. You can still go pay for your own if you want. No one is required to take the money. It is an opportunity for mostly people that can't afford to send their kids to a good school, that are in a bad school system. Now suddenly those kids have choices. I don't see how that's a bad thing, because you don't have to send your kid to any particular school. You don't have to follow any particular rules. If the state somehow comes along later and puts down arbitrary bad rules, parent says, no, I'm not doing that. I'll send my kids somewhere else. You're already getting that in the state schools, right? So I don't see what the downside is. I think those are people crying wolf. And here we have the Senate passing, I think, a really good starting point for parents to decide, instead of the government say, here's your one choice. If it's bad, I'm sorry, you're paying for it through your property taxes and your sales tax, but you have no choice. So in my opinion, there's no downside to trying this.
Well, I don't think that people think that there's a downside to giving that option, but again, you see the woke ideology infiltrating schools across the country. What do you say to parents who would say, I am paying into this and I do want to use a school voucher to send my kid to a better school, but I don't want them knowing that, for instance, a person who's born as a male can identify as a female. I don't want that indoctrinated. Is it
so? Right, the state isn't doing that. There's no.
No, that's what I'm saying. But what happens if that came into play?
Here's what I say. You can always say when you do something good, well, we can't have freedom because people might abuse it, right? We can't allow freedom in our country. We can't have people governing themselves, because down the road we could get some bad people that make it bad. Well, that's the same kind of thinking that would say, oh, we can't allow school choice and let parents to take the money and put it where they want, because someday the state may come and say, well, we're going to put requirements on that, and they're bad requirements. How are we any worse off? We just got bad requirements. We have bad requirements now in the schools. We already have, a system where it's one size fits all. We have state regulation and all kinds of stuff, and we try to control everything at the state level to try to protect our kids and undo some of the woke ideology. Here we have a chance to free us. Let's try the freedom model and see if we can act responsibly. Parents act responsibly and go vote. Stop the state from imposing rules on private schools and private parents making their own decisions. I think it's an amazing bill, and it's an amazing start to hopefully freedom in Texas.
I want to stay on education. So the University of Texas at Austin, it is home to the Global Disinformation Lab, which was created back in 2020 to fight so-called mis and disinformation. Now, they partnered with the Global Disinformation Index, which essentially blacklists and targets conservative outlets. So they come out with this report, and this is according to the Washington Examiner, and they say New York Post, OAN, Newsmax, The Federalist, they are at high risk for giving disinformation. Then they say the Washington Post, the New York Times, BuzzFeed, very low risk of disinformation. Bear in mind, the State Department has worked with its Global Engagement Center to actually help facilitate funding for this. Now, Governor Abbott's office, they have ignored questions when we've asked, what is your opinion about taxpayer funds going to a lab that works to censor conservatives? And he wouldn't answer. But he also wouldn't say whether he has any plans to prevent state funds from going to this lab. But that's a genuine concern, not only for Texans, but for Americans and conservatives who feel like they have been targeted. What say you?
Well, first of all, I'm not the governor. I can't answer the question for him, and I don't know what he's thinking because I've never asked him this question. But if it were me, I'd certainly be very concerned about state money going to create some, disincentive for free speech.
Right.
And I don't want to limit speech I disagree with or speech I agree with. I think this is the genius of our country. You want to incentivize people to give their opinions, and that's why we have, a vote, and then that's how things are decided, not by the government spending money and big tech spending money to disenfranchise voters by shutting off their speech. So I'm doing everything I can with my lawsuits against big tech to try to undo that. So I certainly wouldn't want the state funding projects that would limit free speech.
Is there something that you can do just with the University of Texas itself, or would that have to be? That
would have to be through the governor's office and through the legislature. My office, unfortunately, they're clients of ours. We represent them. So we're in a real awkward position sometimes because we have clients that are doing things we don't agree with, but we don't make their decisions. Our job is to represent them legally, and we have the obligation to do that unless, they choose to go another direction with their counsel, which they often do.
Right.
Or if they're doing something unconstitutional, then I can't go against the Constitution. But if I just disagree with them on something, we're stuck in a spot where we represent every state agency.
Right. I want to ask one last question before we let you go. I want to put it to a little bit China. This is interesting. So Missouri's Attorney General Andrew Bailey, he announced that they are investigating the St. Louis Overseas Chinese Service Center after the Daily Caller News Foundation did an investigation. Now, these centers are Chinese intelligence centers. They have contact with Beijing's police authority, and they're billed at helping promote Chinese culture in America and, helping Chinese citizens assimilate. Both Senators Cruz and Cornyn, they have wrote letters to the FBI, the DOJ, kind of calling for answers and an investigation into the Houston-based location. Is your office aware of the situation? And if so, are you going to launch an investigation into the Houston location?
So I don't know enough about it to say whether I even could. Right. So I act under whatever state law allows me to act. For instance, I had authority to prosecute voter fraud, so I acted under it. When the court tells me I don't have the authority, we stopped because now our cases get dismissed anyway. So I would have to figure out, first of all, what is the sort of problem, and then do we have the authority to go investigate? We don't have any criminal authority other than the voter fraud, so I can't do anything if it's a criminal. And then I have to figure out, is it a civil problem that I have authority to deal with? Like we deal with consumer fraud. I have something to do. It may be that I don't have any direct authority, that's more of a local law enforcement or a federal. But if I had more detail, I could answer the question better.
Right. Yeah. I think it's just a concern. I think you see, Chinese Confucius Institutes in the United States.
I'm absolutely concerned. And different state attorney generals have different authority based on whatever, their legislatures or their constitutional laws do. But I certainly, if I had authority, I'd be very concerned and I'd be very interested. I've tried to figure out how to deal with the China problem. I've tried to figure out whether we have some authority to sue Chinese businesses or sue the Chinese government. And there's really no good way to do it because it's really in the hands of the federal government to handle it. And when they're not protecting us, just like on the border, we're all in trouble. And that's another reason that the Biden administration needs to just go away, because they're not doing things that are protecting Americans. They're actually enabling the Chinese and the cartels to dominate the world.
And it's such a shame because they're wasting taxpayer dollars to target you and Texas for trying to keep your citizens
Look,
safe.
that whole thing was set up by Biden, in my opinion. They went to the Texas Democrats and said, this is what we want. And of course, Dade Phelan has to do what they want. So he agreed to do it.
How does he keep getting elected? I just don't understand how a Republican gets elected
because
when
it's not covered. I mean, it wasn't covered. People, they've been getting away with this for over a decade. The media doesn't cover it. And I'm just now saying, okay, I'm going to expose it. Because normally you don't want to fight in your own party. You're trying to beat the Democrats, right? Well, now I realize, look, it's over. He's completely capitulated to the Democrats.
Right.
The Department of Justice sent 2 lawyers to help them in their impeachment meet.
How is that legal?
Well, so they can hire whoever they want to be part of the House investigating team. So there's 5 members of the committee called General Investigating and Ethics.
Okay.
They hired 4 lawyers, 2 of them from the Department of Justice. Is that an accident? That they came from Washington, D.C. to come investigate me? Do you think that's some like coincidence? It's not. That's the Department of Justice. That's Biden saying, well, we haven't gotten them through the election. We haven't gotten them other ways. Let's do this. Go do this. And they did it. And they did it.
And it's just amazing because, the allegations that were out against you, they were out before you won your reelection. Voters consciously went and voted for you, knowing what they knew and said, we want Ken Paxton.
And there's a state law that says that no officer can be removed from office for allegations or claims prior to the elections if the voters knew about them and they voted. And yet nobody paid attention.
And there's no enforcement in the House to hold.
No one paid attention to that. Even when we got to the Senate, it became an irrelevant law. And I'm like, what happened to state law being followed by any body of the legislature? So fortunately, I went through the trial and they did not present a case with evidence, but I still shouldn't have had to go through it. It should have been dismissed just based on state law. I still had to go through it. And it costs a lot of money to go through that process. It's, it was a $5 million process for me that, guess what? There was no guarantee that I was ever going to get lawyers, that I was going to get the money. I still am, millions of dollars in debt because of this. So they put me in a bad spot not following state law.
And now, is there any way for you to take that to a different court or something to say like they violated? No.
It just happened.
They have shackled you essentially.
Yeah. And meanwhile, they literally got me out of office in 3 days. So I had no resources. I had no communication staff. I had no lawyers. I had no money because I'd spent $16 million in the primary. So all my campaign money was gone. Right. I hadn't been able to raise money during session because it's not allowed. And then the comptroller, Glenn Hager, decided to illegally cut off my salary. So I had no personal income.
They can cut your salary off. So
it's not legal.
4 months.
No salary. Yeah. So he cut my salary off illegally. And he knows the only place I can have a remedy, I have to spend my own money to go back, get 4 months of pay, which would be expensive. 2, I'd have to likely sue in Austin, which is liberal judges. And so he's like, I'll just take it away. You sue me. It doesn't cost him anything. So Glenn Hager decided, you know what? It doesn't cost me anything. It's going to cost him a fortune. I'm just going to punish him. And there's no law that says he can do it, but I have to go sue him to get it back.
That is a real shame because you are in a Republican state where you'd assume that state laws would be followed and that there wouldn't be infighting targeting another Republican with no basis.
His is personal ambition. He's close to the House. I'm sure the House wanted him to do that. And he's thinking about his future. Like, he wants to run for something else apparently. And he decided that it was in his political best interest to take away my salary and make it hard for me, even though it's directed by statute and by the appropriations bill to pay the Attorney General.
Attorney General Ken Paxton, I could not keep up with this if I were you, if I was in your position. So bless your heart for being able to put up with what the Democrats and Republicans have put you through. Folks, Attorney General Ken Paxton,